Hey, this is Idea Coach. It's Coach Strong. Special video for you guys today. The history of Japanese MMA as we know it today. Hey, this is Idea Coach. He's a Coach. Strong. History of Japanese Mixed Martial Arts Part 1. There's going to be a multi-part series coming out weekly leading up to UFC's FUEL TV 8 to the third modern day UFC Japanese card. The conclusion will be conducted after that event takes place. I did this, and I'm so glad I didn't do this last year when UFC went back to Japan the first time, because this card, and just by what's been going on and these fighters who are going to go on the card and their recent history, this may be the last time we see guys like Vanderlei, Gomi, and Hunt and on a main card with a winning record. You know, these guys are pretty old now, and there's just not a lot of time left in their careers, at least that I see for them within the UFC. So I think this should be the swan song of Japanese mixed martial arts, and I'm going to have a special conclusion, which is about 8% done. I won't know exactly what it's going to be until I see the results of UFC FUEL TV 8, but please share this, and I want this to be a video that will be part of a larger community. I usually don't like to talk and ask viewers for, leave comments or beg for subscriptions. That's just not who I am. But this is something I truly do love. And for those who don't know, Takanori Gomi is my favorite fighter of all time. He is the reason I ended up watching MMA on a very consistent basis back in 2004. So I'm here to share my love of Japanese mixed martial arts with you, and I hope that you understand that and share and leave whatever comments that you want within these next sets of videos pertaining to this topic. Okay guys, let's get into it. Mixed martial arts in Japan has always been comprised of one part combat and one part spectacle. Like most things, MMA, in a certain sense, has a connection with the Gracie family. After challenging and accepting numerous opponents in Brazil, Helio Gracie was the riddle to answer in the martial arts world. As most would know, Gracie defeated the vast majority of opponents in Vale Tudo fights which resembled early UFC fights. These matches varied in length and usually only ended when there was a finish. In 1951, Gracie fought Japanese judoka Masahiko Kimura, and depending on who you ask, this man is the inventor of the Kimura lock. I say that because catch wrestlers dispute this claim by saying that it was an old move from their style of fighting, and they called it a double wrist lock way back in the early 1900s. Either way, this is the move that was used to defeat Helio back in 51. In the context of history, Japan as a nation was still reeling from the after effects of World War II. Pro wrestling, conducted by trained martial artists such as judo practitioners and catch wrestlers, was one of the platforms that the Japanese used to bring their nation together. Kimura's victory overseas was a big sensation in the fighting world. After coming back to Japan, promoters of Japanese pro wrestling organization held a match between him and what can be considered the equivalent of Hulk Hogan in the 1980s, Rikidozan. Although Rikidozan was Korean, he held Japanese nationality. That was a big deal later in his career dealing with the Yakuza bosses. The Yakuza is the Japanese mafia that has control of MMA and pro wrestling in Japan, both then and now to some degree. Kimura versus Rikidozan was a dream matchup that ended in a disaster. Rikidozan suddenly broke from the script and started to really attack Kimura in their match, which in turn fucked up all the money for future bouts that could have happened. It is reported that this incident actually led to Rikidozan's death some 10 years later. Personally, I think it was from a combination of things that transpired from then to his death, with that being the foundation. No one is going to kill you for beating up someone a decade after it happened. Kimura, within that time, Kimura went on to form his own wrestling league, introducing Lucha Libre wrestlers from Mexico into his organization in Japan. Lucha Libre is the fastest, most unrealistic style of professional wrestling known. Look up Ultimo Dragon and Rey Mysterio to see all the high-flying maneuvers that they conduct within their matches. Nonetheless, a real martial artist, Kimura, brought that into Japan and claimed all that fighting style to be legitimate. Before Vince McMahon inadvertently or deliberately admitted that wrestling was predetermined to avoid athletic commissions during the steroid scandal of the early 1990s, pro wrestling was taken to be serious, especially before the 1980s Hogan TV era when wrestling matches were much more methodical. In the 1970s, it was clear that the blending of martial arts and pro wrestling was to remain intact. Antonio Inoki was taking on Muhammad Ali in a high-profile card that also featured Andre the Giant versus a professional boxer. This card garnered a lot of interest, but the fight was crap. It was 15 rounds of nothing. This time it was Ali, the American, that was a legitimate fighter and not his Japanese opponent, Inoki, who was also a student of Riki Dozan. During the 80s and 90s, pro wrestling boom in Japan was as big as it was in the States. New Japan and UWF were two of the biggest companies for wrestling. To be a pro wrestler in Japan, one would have to live in a dojo during their training period, which could be years. This is unless you are already a star in the West. They learned moves, learned etiquette, they also learned rank. Punishment is swift and hard for those who don't adhere to the rules. How different is that from an MMA gym or a single discipline dojo? In the States, punishment is usually just getting kicked out of a gym, but in places like Japan and Brazil, exile is less common, but an ass whooping is not. If there is one key figure in what we know as Japanese MMA to be and how it was and is conducted, it's pro wrestler turned pro wrestling promoter turned mixed martial artist turned mixed martial artist promoter, Nobuhiko Takada. Join me next time I'll be discussing more about the man that started Pride FC and how things were conducted during those days before Pride truly legitimized itself.